What could you do in one day? When it comes to how you spend your time, you want it to be intentional, impactful, inspiring, and you want your investment to be worth it. The Modern Lab Leader Online Symposium is your chance to unplug, refocus, and level up your leadership in just one day. Learn from world-class speakers and thought leaders across industries. Gain practical tools to amplify your influence and lead with confidence. Invest in yourself. Invest in your future. Register today for free. What could you do in one day? When it comes to how you spend your time, you want it to be intentional, impactful, inspiring, and you want your investment to be worth it. The Modern Lab Leader Online Symposium is your chance to unplug, refocus, and level up your leadership in just one day. Learn from world-class speakers and thought leaders across industries. Gain practical tools to amplify your influence and lead with confidence. Invest in yourself. Invest in your future. Register today for free.
Thank you for joining us for today's final talk. I'm George Hammond, conference producer at Technology Networks, and I'm pleased to introduce Trevor Morones presenting the much anticipated talk on driving behaviors for food and beverage breakthroughs. Control Point founder Trevor is a classically culinary trained expert butcher. As a craft butcher, he understands firsthand the desire to focus on the craft and create the best products possible, making throngs of satisfied customers and fulfilling brand promises of quality, efficiency, and unique value. Trevor brings his brilliant engineering mind and spirit to craft training and solutions to minimize the amount of time spent with red tape and regulations, eliminating costly mistakes and fines while creating cultures of operational excellence. A very warm welcome to you, Trevor. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and we welcome any questions that you may have. Please ask questions using the Q&A system to the right-hand side of the video player. And now, without further delay, I would like to hand over to Trevor to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, George. It's a pleasure to be here. And as it's already been stated, my name is Trevor Morones. And today we're going to be talking about driving behaviors and food and beverage breakthroughs. I think this is applicable beyond food and beverage. Anywhere that there's quality management systems, much of this content is applicable. With that, just a little bit more of an introduction. I've spent the better half of 20 years in food and beverage, and it started probably over 30 years ago, burning toast and oversalting eggs with my father in the kitchen. But I learned that my interests were outside of automotive mechanics and in food and beverage, which is where I pursued a career as a porter or dishwasher and prep cook. And that's where I really enjoyed the camaraderie of these environments, the challenges, or as I see them as opportunities, as well as ultimately elevating performances. It's a collective team effort. It's not just the individual themselves, it's everyone together as one. But with this, it's important for you to know that I am also an epileptic patient. I am going on over 650 days without a seizure, so you shouldn't see or hear anything in this situation. But if you were to, take no concern, just carry on, and I'm sure that I'll come right back to. That's generally what happens. But with that, food is not only close to my head, no pun intended, but also close to my heart because it can be medicinal in some cases. And with that, think about the context of creating ketogenesis, for the body. And this isn't necessarily just a marketing fad, but an actual way to mitigate seizure activity. In this photo, I happen to be preparing a mushroom dashi with zucchini noodles that was for a competition known as Gina Mullen's keto cooking competition. And this was one of the winning dishes. And through that, we were able to talk about how we design these things for scalability. If we were filling multiple hospitals, multiple children and adults that were living with this ailment of epilepsy, because there's such a big variety of it. But in this time together, I'm going to share a token with you and use it at your discretion. Here's your token. It's virtual. It's not a physical, tangible item in this case, though we are working on actually getting tangible ones made so we can pass them out. Heads or tails? Let it remind everyone that there are only actions and consequences. What action shall be a commitment for breakthroughs? That's entirely up to each of us. There are only actions and consequences, or in this case, outcomes. This story was given to me by one of my mentors, and the purpose of the token is to prevent oneself or even an organization of teams from making excuses. Well, we'll just do it later or tomorrow or the next day. It's on the calendar for another time. Well, the objective is these tokens, they're round. And if you actually just get around to it, you do it, heads or tails, the outcomes are quite different. Wow, who knew that something tangible or even virtual could be of value to people? In this presentation, there are 3 takeaways that I want each of you to have in this. If you don't take away the full scope of it, it would be the driving behaviors. Where do these come from? Obviously, in this case, it's money. When we're talking about creating value, what does that mean? Well, it's collectively getting together and putting forth the ideas of what will work, what could work, what does work, and how can we actually make something like a breakthrough. And creating value doesn't always come from the most positive situations. Sometimes we get put into the rut and we have to get up and dust ourselves up and figure out how we're going to go forward. Rather than always looking at the past, we're always projecting forward. And then the results. How do we drive results in these cases? One very important thing in order to have breakthroughs is to have transparency in the supply chain. We're talking about food and beverage in this case, but one of my favorite quotes from Anias Nin is we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And there's this image here, you can make of it whatever you'd like. Some people call it one thing, some people call it another thing, some people don't see anything at all. But, how might you describe this? And I look forward to the chat kind of blowing up in terms of what they might see or not see in this. But throughout the supply chain, there's smoke and mirrors. We need to be transparent as these operators throughout our supply chain that feeds us. COVID taught us something very well. Oh, the supply chain can be just totally shut down and disrupted by a variety of things. What a great opportunity, because we should have primary, secondary, and tertiary suppliers, service providers, or even product providers in many different cases. Maybe it's co-packers. But how do you describe your relationship from the beginning? Is the relationship sound throughout? Well, responsibility, must be taken, and leadership understands their systems require continuous updates. Nothing is ever finalized. It's never final draft, and we're sticking to it. It's continuously being updated. But we can look at program trends, and these data groups tell us a variety of things: is what is working, what isn't working, and through that we can actually see a change in risk, or we can make changes prior to risk becoming a greater challenge for us. But before any discrepancies support efficient solutions, knowledge of supply chain and communication with each operation involved is critical to stay ahead of the curve. Vetting your suppliers is a critical component. And in vetting your suppliers, is everything advertised and done as it says? Well, yes, sometimes no. Sometimes we need to actually send people out to do second-party audits specific to our suppliers, or they can go through third-party audits, and that will give us an idea of what is going on in our favor, or sometimes not. Opportunities. Well, these are what the breakthroughs and advances are. And though some people can see failures as, wow, there was no positive in that situation, that's a really good opportunity where you start to reframe and you reset. And you can identify what your common and special cause variation was, or is. Is it the different operator? Is it the different machines because they operate with different precision? Is it the materials that are causing a difference in the situation? Well, all of this is where we can start to fine-tune things to create these breakthroughs and barriers. Now, before I even put this presentation together, I was kind of thinking what's going to really captivate everyone from an international perspective about breakthroughs, where they're going to go, wow, we got to go see this. This must be so fascinating. But in some of the context, I started going back and forth. Why make it something that it isn't? Why not just go through something that it's what we practice and what we actually educate and train others to do, where results are actually present? The data in, or the input, is transparent, it's sincere, and therefore what we want on the outside, the output of the data, it's phenomenal. And where there are challenges, create opportunities for us. Guess what? Change is the only constant. Let's take it and make it to our advantage. So, driving behaviors. Nobody likes getting an FTA 483 letter that you're in trouble, or one from the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service that you're losing your license. I can't see anybody in the chat going, yeah, we like that. Or I've never run into anybody who has thought that that would be of value because it causes operational downtime. Is it from a recall? Generally, recalls can cost about 20 to 30 million US dollars. I have a couple of examples of where we've probably exceeded those numbers, but we'll get to them in a second. Overall, human behavior shows that operators can cut corners to meet quotas without using quality management systems to comprehend the impact of the total organization. What you put in is what you're going to get out. So if you're putting in little to minor interest, then what do you expect to get out of the situation? Probably not the results that you're looking for, especially when they're driven by money. Well, at what cost do we want to actually gain a positive to the bottom line? And you can lose money from creating illnesses. Why cut corners? Why should we get cinnamon from supplier A, even though supplier B has a higher quality product and their certificate of analysis proves that it is a much better product itself? Well, it's everything itself. These behaviors are literally driven by money. Either we're making money or we're losing money. And it's very important for us to understand as well as practice that when we're pushing or pulling from one area of the business, it will impact another. And it's fascinating how we are connected and within our organizations start to behave to benefit ourselves selfishly. Well, we're going to do what we want, what we think's best. Sometimes it's not based off of what our opinions are, rather, what is the actual quality management system telling us to do? Overall, if you're going to invent yourself as a leader, to be successful, you need to learn to lead people. Nothing happens by force or dictation, so leadership needs fine tuning or sharpening, if you will. But ultimately, the transformation process starts with you as the individual and cycles through the various departments as well as the organizational tiers, the functions, or even the locations of the operation. The final stage accumulates in the quality management system, which is accessible to the entire company. Some of the shifts, yesterday somebody said, what is a shift in this case? Well, it's generally because people have decided to cut corners to cause some sort of shift. I'll give you an example that's not present here, which is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution caused a shift in locomotive transportation. We had a bunch of locomotives derail. We had a bunch of food spoilage going on. We had people complaining about the working conditions. Those were shifts that caused concern for things to take a different toll, for things to actually change. But there's only a shift when there's a concern for business itself. And it is hard to make the business case even when it is the right thing to do. Obviously, it took a lot of things to derail before we made any changes. What about the formula situation with Abbott? Well, they knew that they had micro problems well before they decided to make any changes. And then the FDA had to get involved, and it took a substantial amount of time before the FDA actually went to get involved. My goodness, what is going on? Well, like we said before, all these things are driven by money, either making money or losing money. You have Chipotle, the 2015, 2018 situation where this is not the entire story of Chipotle, but they decided to remove a service in order to clean the ice machine themselves, therefore creating Norwalk virus. And hey, we're going to remove this cost because we can do it better. Can you do it better? Or are you just making excuses for yourself? The other ones are quite important. I know our good friend Robert Thomas is going to be going into elemental contamination. I wanted to be sure to put the lead poisoning in this and just bring it to everybody's attention, because that's the example that we had provided earlier where we're getting cinnamon from supplier A, and supplier A is only giving us a cheaper product, but it's not even cinnamon, it's elemental contaminated product, so that they could make more money off of us importing this product out of Honduras. And I'm not sure if it was other places as well, but Honduras was one of the main suppliers. Creating value. You have to shift from short-term values to long-term objectives. How are we going to hit our marks? Not just one, but many. A global consciousness, a view that transcends our exclusive identification with the generational and political grouping into which we have been born by accident. The solution to food and beverage problems requires a perspective that embraces us all, the planet, and the future, because we are all in this together. So if we can remove this selfishness from these situations, we can actually create value in many different aspects. In quality management system, it's not just about the person putting the product to the consumer or the other businesses to help it get to the consumer, but it's about everyone involved in it. It's a very complex system, but it's really not that challenging. When we're teaching class, we generally refer to these things as watches. I don't really have any particular watch other than a digital one that records my heart rate when I'm running. But some people that we work with like really nice watches and they pay a lot for them. So we use that example to say, do you ever just put your watch to your ear and can you hear the gears working together? No, because when it's a smooth transition, you shouldn't hear much of anything. But when there's things out of sync, then it sounds like you're learning how to drive a standard transmission for the first time and everything's just crunching together. It doesn't really benefit anybody in that sense. So you have to have a multidimensional equation. What is going to be the best multidimensional equation? Well, pulling or pushing from one area of the business is going to cause shifts in other parts of the business or another impact. And if you were to take some of the interest or some of the time at which you were going to focus, say, on data mining, possibly data gathering, then this somewhat of a circumference is no longer going to be completely symmetrical. It's going to start to get all wonky and wobbly. Now it looks like a tire down the interstate that's about to explode. It's not of any value. So you have to have a balance to things. And in order to find the balance, sometimes it is trial by fire, but having a quality management system in place is really going to be of value to where you can see what does work and what doesn't work. And ultimately, when things aren't working, it's never anyone's fault. It's the system that is skewed that needs to be evaluated. So when you go into facilities, maybe you're going in to assess your suppliers, and rather than point fingers to say, you are at fault for this, forget who. Why don't we worry about education and training people so that we can actually elevate performances together itself rather than just come back to the same old thing where we're not really moving forward. We've plateaued, we haven't gone anywhere, but we're about to fall off the cliff and we don't know how far that descent will be, but it might hurt. Results, you know, how? Well, the results are important, but how is irrelevant when there are shortcuts or hacks. If the data is present, people generally don't, and when I say people, I'm referring to leadership. Leadership generally doesn't care how the results have been made when the data is in front of them. Cool, we're seeing a positive increase. This is fabulous for us. But when there's hacks or shortcuts, I end up listening to a couple of podcasts and they're sharing this is a hack that we've developed or identified. We learned it from somebody. Well, there's nothing clever about it. Why are you reducing your value or product value? I don't really see the point. Maybe I'm missing the mark, but I can't understand what the hack is. In terms of statistical process control, this is your process capability studies that will indicate where the appropriate process target and help validate the process. Ultimately, we said what we're going to do, we're doing what we said we're going to do, and the data that's coming out of this is superb. And now we can use this as marketing opportunities to say, this is what sets us apart. We're not just the run-of-the-mill item or process or service provider by just doing something that other people are doing as well. What sets us apart? There's a lot of power in quality management systems, and change is the only constant, and quality management systems are the pathways to endless improvement opportunities. If we thought about results, let's think about somebody that says, well, we have a food cost of about 40 to 45%. Well, my head just explodes. I started my career working in food and beverage, washing dishes, and then I transitioned into food manufacturing, where I spend most of my time now, as well as the rest of our team at Control Point. whether it's food manufacturing or food service, and somebody coming back to say, we have the results of about a 40 to 45% food cost. My goodness, why don't we look at an opportunity to create some sort of central hub that could reduce your food cost at least 15%? Say you're down to 30%. Well, that seems a little bit more logical. How much would that potentially save the operator? Well, they spent about every every time they did their food costs, they were spending about $1 million. And then we ran the numbers, and they could save about $1.8 million. That itself would pay for the labor. That itself would help retrofit their central hub to um, create a commissary to supply all of the other units, being 15 other units in one city. The numbers are right here. They don't really care how, but if we put the number in front of them, then they might get really big eyes to go, yeah, we're interested. It's quite fascinating. Here are some of the clients that we work with. These are just a couple, and I know that I can get on rants, especially when I'm enjoying my conversation, but I want to save enough time for questions so that we can go through them and also see what else has come through the chat while we've been doing this. Also, like I said before, be sure to go check out Rob Thomas's presentation, and he'll go through a lot of fascinating things on elemental contamination. I met Mr. Rob Thomas through ASTM International, and we've stayed close friends ever since. But this is where we'll pause for a moment of questions.
Before we start the Q&A segment of this session, I just want to take a quick moment to remind our viewers to submit any questions that you may have for Trevor using the chat system to the right. And with that out of the way, Trevor, your first question today is, technology is advancing food and beverage. What is an example of a positive gain from the use of technology?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Immediately, I'm starting to think of the world of security, in terms of digital and what's going on. Here, we're based in Las Vegas. MGM and others have made the news for being hacked. So, how good is your technology? How secure is it? Who has access? Who is granting access? How is access being removed? How is this technology being kept up to date? I don't know if that is the most straightforward answer to the question, but I hope it is sort of, sparking other things to go into additional cues.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Trevor. Now, we have a slightly wider afield question here from our audience. So, what are the breakthroughs in food for space exploration?
Oh, goodness. Well, I don't have the security clearance with NASA or any of the other institutions that are a part of it, but some of my friends have been working on product development to put food into space for longer space exploration. And through that, how can they keep nutritional value forward rather than just freeze drying something, the lyophilization of things. But what is the opportunity to have wholesome, nutritious products throughout the course of the entire mission itself? I have a feeling that with all of the interest in mushrooms outside of space, and I don't mean this in some sort of psychedelic experience, um, I think that mushrooms are going to play a huge part of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Trevor. That is absolutely fascinating to hear. We have another question here, which is, what advances will come from the overturning of the Chevron doctrine by the Supreme Court in the United States?
Ooh, that one warms my blood. I have a lot to say of that, even so that I wrote a position paper with Don Morrow and put it on LinkedIn. I think it's an opportunity. Ultimately, when it first went through, it was a very interesting thing because it appears to be that the larger corporations that are most interested in the biggest bottom line will have the biggest benefit from removing red tape. And I don't see that being the case itself. But we see this as an opportunity for facilities, whether they're in food, beverage, pharmaceutical, pet food, animal feed, whatever it may be, to actually embrace the value of third party certification for other people to come in to say, wow, this is really good, or you got some things to fine tune, but you're headed in the right direction. Because ultimately, it states that the judge doesn't have to fall back on the agency anymore. They can make their own sort of interpretation. And with that, that brings questions to me of going, how competent are you for something like this? Do you have, you know law, but what do you know of manufacturing on this caliber? Maybe it's not anything to do with food, but it could be for space, for flight, for automotive, for locomotive. And I think it will generate opportunities for Congress to potentially generate laws in a different manner. Hopefully, the industry sees this as an opportunity to be more present, more active, and more vocal rather than just being reactive to something. They can actually be proactive.
Another excellent answer, Trevor. Thank you so much. We have time for just a few more questions today before we close out this session. So, Trevor, are third-party certifications supporting a paradigm shift in food and beverage?
Oh, that's another good question. I believe that third party certification could potentially support a paradigm shift. Ultimately, though, if operators are only preparing 2 days out of 12, or excuse me, 2 months out of 12 months for a third party certification, are they going to be a part of a paradigm shift? Probably not. But when we're continuously working towards things, breaking them down into, say, 2 hours per week, and getting around to actually updating things, seeing what is working, what isn't working, communicating with the team, and making sure that everybody has the necessary resources and tools for success, there could be a paradigm shift.
Thank you so much, Trevor. And our final question of the day is, how can a global company's cultural shift take precedence?
Ultimately, it starts with people at every level and communication. If there is something that's present, just communicating. In the corporate setting, it's very blue meme. Things are as they are, but ultimately, how can we, as people, a part of a company, play the game and actually make a statement to communicate with people throughout the organization itself? Things aren't going to change overnight, but ultimately, communication is vital for anything really to take place. And it's not just for us to say A and somebody to repeat A back, but for the other person to have full comprehension, because we as people tend to speak in the manner of, I say X, other people hear Y. So are we communicating in a way that is actually creating these inquiries for people to process what is truly being said, what is truly being done?
That's absolutely wonderful. A big thank you, Trevor, but unfortunately, that is all that we have time for today. To everyone in the audience, remember, like all previous talks, this presentation will be available for on-demand viewing for the next 30 days. That just leaves me to say thank you once again, Trevor. We really do appreciate your time today and for you sharing your expertise. And for everyone watching, we'll be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific for another fantastic lineup of talks. Thank you and goodbye.